welcome to Arts Alive. This week we're in Southport at the Atkinson Museum, where we're going to meet Stephen Whittle, who's the manager of the museum, and will tell us more about this fantastic venue. Hello Stephen.
How do you do?
Thank you for having us here.
You're very welcome.
Can you tell us a little bit about this fantastic building?
Okay, well, we're stood in the foyer of the Atkinson in Southport, which is on a prominent spot on Lloyd Street. It's the entrance to our whole art complex, really, which includes a new museum that's recently opened, art galleries, there's a shop here, a cafe, the library, of course. So it's a very busy centre, lots of people coming and going every day.
Can you tell us a bit about the history of the building? Because I believe it was built in 1874?
That's right, 1874, and it's developed quite a bit since then. At the time we had Cambridge Hall, which is the lecture theatre essentially, and the museum and gallery on the first floor. Since then everything's been combined into one, so that we operate as one centre essentially. It's got all these lovely facilities here, including theatres, cinemas, all in one place.
And I believe it's been refurbished as well?
It's been very extensively refurbished, costing something like £17.5 million, so it's had a complete overhaul, and the facilities are really excellent and up to date now as well, so we can bring touring exhibitions nationally here and present really major exhibition projects particularly.
How did this building happen?
It's named after William Atkinson, who was an industrialist. I think he had a mill in Preston. So he came to Southport with his wife for health reasons. So Southport was a major sort of health resort in the 19th century. He settled over here in the 19th century, and he endowed lots of public buildings, churches and the library and the art gallery and so on. So that's how it was set up in the first place. And then the council started collecting artworks and building up a permanent collection, which most of that is still here and on display in the galleries. What is so particular about this building? It's just a very beautiful Victorian, sort of high Victorian building, I suppose, from the late 19th century. It's really three buildings in one. It combines the old art gallery, the lecture theatre, and an old bank building where the library is sited. So there was a lot of work over the last 2 or 3 years involved in just bringing it into one centre and making it operate really sort of efficiently for the public. Very good. Should we move on? Okay.
The Atkinson is a venue with multiple purposes: library, theatre, studio, cafe, museum, and exhibition spaces. Since January and until October, the gallery exhibits rediscoveries, a selection of artworks from the Atkinson's permanent collection.
It's an exhibition from the Atkinson's permanent collection. So all the works here have been collected over the last 130-40 years. We've selected work for this particular show that hasn't been seen for a long time, and it was inspired, I suppose, by the fact that we recently rediscovered a painting that we didn't actually know that we had. So the picture behind me is it's called Limehouse, and it's by the artist Christopher Richard Wynne Nevinson. It was listed in our catalogue as just being landscaped by an unknown artist. So I spotted this picture on the BBC Your Paintings website just before I started working here, and realised that it was a picture by Nevinson, who was quite an important artist in the early part of the 20th century. So shortly after arriving here and beginning work as a curator, I had a look at the painting once the pictures came back on site, because all the pictures had gone away during the refurbishment of the building. And I was even more convinced that it was a picture by Nevinson. And sure enough, we turned up a print that he'd done in later years of the same subject. So we sent the picture away for conservation, and the conservator revealed the artist's signature at the bottom as well. So it confirms the fact that it's a very important painting by a major British artist. So we had a look at the rest of the collection and thought, what else has not been out for a long time? What works have been reattributed recently? And it turns out that quite a lot of the material hasn't been out on public display for several decades in some cases. So we've organised the exhibition pretty much in two halves. The works behind me are similar in date to the Nevinson painting. They're all from that early part of the 20th century, just before the First World War. And they're works by quite adventurous modernist painters who were trying new and exciting things and sort of pushing the boundaries of contemporary art at that time. In contrast to that, on the other wall, we've got paintings by much more traditional academic artists, also from our permanent collection. And a lot of interesting paintings by artists who were based in Southport, or were born in Southport and became major artists during the course of their lives. Artists like Philip Connard and Adrian Stokes, who were important Royal Academy artists who worked in a traditional manner, but still had a story to tell and a distinctive style. So we've tried to contrast the two, really, the traditional and the modern, with this selection of artworks. At the bottom end of the gallery, we've also got a large number of works on paper out. We're beginning to work our way through our collection of prints and drawings and watercolours. And again, there are major works there by artists like Paul Nash, who else have we got in there? Gaudier Bresca, Elizabeth Frink, for example. So it's quite a wide-ranging collection, but very strong in sort of early and mid-20th century British art. And that's what we've tried to draw out in this collection. We've also got quite a few of our sculpture collection out on show, so there are major works here by Epstein, Henry Moore, Elizabeth Frink again. So it's a good survey of that particular part of the collection. And every year we'll change this particular gallery and focus on the strengths of the collection. So early next year we'll be looking at the major works by Victorian artists particularly, and bringing out some of those huge gilt frame Victorian paintings that we've got such an excellent collection of. But yeah, at the moment it's well worth coming along and having a look at this Nevinson, which won't have been seen by anybody for 70 or 80 years. And it's a major vorticist or futurist work of art by an artist who was trying to find a new way of working, a new style. It was painted in 1913. The year after that, he went off to the First World War, and he became the most important and the most famous artist of the First World War in Britain. So this work is particularly important because it's the one in which he established his signature style. He's only known to have painted 3 paintings, I think, in 1913, and this is one of them. One of the others that's still missing. So it's a very important work in terms of determining how he was working towards this new style, this new way of working, this very angular, almost abstracted, flat planes of colour. And it's just a very strong atmospheric painting in its own right.
So we're in front of another painting now. It's London Bridge. Why is it important in this rediscovery exhibition?
Well, this is another example of a painting that's been reattributed, which means essentially that we didn't know who the artist was previously, but we managed to find out. All of the Atkinson's oil paintings are on a BBC website called Your Paintings. In fact, you can view every oil painting in public collections on that same website. And art critics or anybody that's interested in painting, just people with a particular interest in oil painting generally, can go on there and have a look at the work and offer their opinions. There's a section of the site called Art Detectives, where people are encouraged to contribute information that they know about paintings that the curators don't necessarily have. So this picture was on the website, listed as I think it was listed as a view of Florence by an unknown artist. It's been recognised as a picture by an artist called Jacques-Émile Blanche, who was a French artist working in London in the early 20th century. And it was also recognised as a view of London. I think there's a bit of a giveaway because there appears to be a London bus crossing over the bridge there. So how it got retitled as Florence, we're not quite sure. But there's a surprisingly large number of paintings in public collections that are misattributed. They've got the wrong artist, they've got the wrong subject matter. Sometimes the documentation has been lost, or they were poorly documented or undocumented. when they came into the collection. So the Art Detectives website is really useful to us in terms of pinning down accurate information about some of these artists.
Where did you find all these paintings? I mean, is it something that you've been looking for, or is it paintings that were given to you?
All the paintings in this gallery belong to the Atkinson and they're part of the permanent collection. But we're quite unusual, really, in that 3 collections have come together here at the Atkinson. So Bootle Museum and Art Gallery closed in the 1970s, and their collection moved over to Southport. There were also a lot of local scenes, particularly watercolours, that were kept at the Botanic Garden Museum in Churchtown, which closed in 2012. Those pictures have come over here as well. So a large part of our work at the moment is just bringing those collections together, making sense of them, deciding where the strengths are, and thinking about how we're going to develop them in the future as well. So each of our exhibitions gives us an opportunity to explore the collections and see what the strong themes are.
So it was the fact of having to rediscover and look again, where does this painting come from, for instance? It's a kind of quest, isn't it?
It is. It's very much about detective work, and we're really grateful to other people that know more about individual artists than we do. Obviously, you can't know everything about all of the artworks in the collection. The Atkinson is a relatively small or medium-sized gallery, but even we have over 3,000 artworks. So it's a large collection to get to know.
It is now time for a break, but we'll be back just after to find out more about the Atkinson ongoing exhibitions and the Between Land and Sea Museum, tracing the story of Sefton. Welcome back to Arts Alive. This week we take a journey through the Atkinson Museum in Southport. Stephen Whittle, manager of the museum and our guide for the day, introduces us to one of their current exhibition, The Eye of the Beholder.
It's essentially an exhibition that's drawn from our own collection of paintings and sculpture, but we've also borrowed in material from other local museums and galleries, particularly National Museums Liverpool have lent us some wonderful antique sculpture. The theme of the exhibition really is the idea of beauty and how that's changed over time and across different cultures. So there's a really wide selection of material here, including things like 18th and 19th century Japanese prints from the Yoshiwara, the pleasure district of Tokyo, or Edo as it was in the 19th century. There are also things like Mende masks from Sierra Leone, which give an impression of a completely different take on female beauty. I think it's a question of exploring the differences across time and culture rather than the similarities. Having said that, we've got some very early Greek and Roman sculpture in the collection, or in the exhibition, which shows that the sort of prototype, I suppose, particularly for male beauty, was set at a very early time and hasn't changed very much. So it's more a question of exploring the differences. And the starting point for the exhibition really was our own collection of Egyptian material, particularly makeup and mirrors and ointment jars and things that you would find on a dressing table today, I suppose. So there is some continuity in terms of people's preoccupations with beauty.
So here we have paintings, but not just that, there's sculpture and there's even a video.
There's all kinds of different media here in terms of sculpture and painting, certainly. There's a very good sculpture from our own collection of Milo of Croton, which is one of my favourite pieces. I suppose it tells the story of the vanity of beauty, because he's managed to, showing off his strength. Milo has ripped a tree apart, but then got his arm caught in the trunk as it's sprung back together and it's trapped in there, and he's then eaten by wolves. So there you go. That's certainly a sort of cautionary tale, I suppose. We've got contemporary video here as well, and a small work by Qasim Rizi Shaheen that uses his sense of self as well. He was working with the Khusra, or cross-gender community in Pakistan. So he poses himself as a young bride, although you'll notice immediately that he's got a very distinctive beard, and he's in various stages of dressing up as a parlour bride. in the sort of national costume that you can find in Pakistan. So that's a really fascinating work. So we like to explore the idea of beauty across the genders as well. And I suppose the striking thing about some of the classical work particularly is that it's not immediately apparent whether the subjects are male or female. So I think it's fair to say that over the course of the centuries, ideals of male and female beauty have widened and gotten further apart. You can see that divergence, and you can certainly see that it was a lot closer together in early Greek culture, for example.
Now, Stephen, we've been through the galleries downstairs through several exhibitions. Now we're in the Atkinson Museum. What is so particular about it?
Well, it's very new. It only opened a few weeks ago. It's essentially two museums in one. So the part that we're studying at the moment is called Between Land and Sea, 10,000 Years of Sefton's Coast. And this part tells the story of the borough all the way from Bootle up to Southport. And it's a story really of the coast as it's developed since the first people arrived here 10,000 years ago. So it begins with things like the Formby footprints that were left by early Mesolithic people on Formby Beach. And there's also material from a recent archaeological dig at Lunt Meadow, which is quite groundbreaking stuff as well, as really interesting material that tells you how people lived on the coast and why they came over to this particular part of the world. The rich diversity of wildlife habitats, for example. It was a great place to hunt and to find raw materials. But it comes right up to date and tells particularly the story of tourism along the borough. There's a lot of information about the development of Bootle, which in itself was a major shipping port and still has this large container shipping line. We tell the story of the Bootle bombings. I think Bootle was the most heavily bombed port in the country during the Second World War. So there's a huge range of human interest stories, I suppose. Most of the material belongs to the Museum and Art Gallery, but there's lots of loans from individuals and other galleries as well, so we can tell the sporting history of the borough. Places like Aintree Racecourse are very important in this part of the world, and golf courses, of course. Royal Birkdale is just down the road. I think there are 6 golf courses in the borough, and that in itself is an interesting social history story. A lot of the borough developed in relation to the golf courses, which were built first, and then the housing sort of appeared around them. So we try and tell the story of how the borough has developed over the last few hundred years particularly. There's a bit of a mighty leap really from 7,000 or 8,000 years ago up until the sort of 18th century. This stretch of the coast, Sefton, was a very difficult area to settle. It was mostly quite marshy and a lot of river estuaries. So for thousands of years, pretty well, people bypassed it and went round. It was a very difficult area to travel through, particularly with Martin Mere being on our doorstep as well. So people made a big detour around this area until, I suppose, the sort of advent of tourism in the 18th century. And the first place that was really important for tourism, rather than Southport, was actually Bootle. People were going for sea bathing and sea bathing cures on Bootle Beach in the 1780s and 90s. But then Southport becomes really famous as a tourist destination in the early 19th century. The first hotel was built, I think, in the 1793. There's a publican from Churchtown who had the idea that miners might want to come over from Wigan and they would be picked up at Churchtown, brought across here on donkey carts, and people would go swimming in the sea here. And very soon, other buildings started to appear around the original hotel, and Southport became a major centre for tourism after that. So there's lots of different and interesting stories here about the development of Southport as a health resort particularly. We also like to give people a sense of the natural habitats along the coast as well. We've got a huge natural history collection here that we can draw on. So where possible, we make links between the actual landscape, what's out there, and what we've got here in the museum. So it's almost a dual purpose museum. It tells a story for people who live here about their own past, but it's a great introduction for anybody who's not familiar with the area to the whole stretch of coastline along here. And the second part of the museum is our Egyptian gallery, which is Discover Ancient Egypt. Mrs. Goodison gave us a collection of ancient Egyptian artefacts, Well, that went to Bootle Museum and Art Gallery again in the early 20th century. When that museum shut in the 70s, a lot of it was boxed and put away. It wasn't seen again for the next 40 or 50 years. So it's great now that we've got a really up-to-date facility to bring that out and to get school visits through and just attract hundreds of visitors a day to come and see the collections.
And what are the next plans for the museum in the future months?
Well, the museum is a semi-permanent display, but we want to develop each of the displays over time, so that people are already starting to come to us with collections of their own material that they would like to add in. There's all sorts of expertise and interest out there, human interest stories. So we're collecting what we call Sefton Voices, interviews with people who have stories to tell, or they might have one key object that they want to display with us that would tell a particular story. So the museum should be a really dynamic place and should develop always over time. But apart from that, it's just going to be a really busy location for people to come during the holidays and over the weekends and just enjoy a few hours here.
What about the galleries? What are your future exhibitions?
We've got quite a few interesting shows coming up, really. There's a travelling exhibition from the Victoria and Albert Museum called Recording Britain, and it's a collection of paintings that was put together by Sir Kenneth Clarke. So it's a great opportunity to see a national touring exhibition here in Southport. We're working on a temporary exhibition called Sacred Landscapes that looks at the holy places, I suppose, in the Egyptian landscape. Again, drawing on our own collection, but adding in material in from other museums and private collectors as well. We have an annual open exhibition as well. But if you come every 2 or 3 months, you'll see a new exhibition. I think there'll be maybe 9 or 10 exhibitions on every year over the course of each year. So it should be, it's always going to be a very vibrant place to come and see exhibitions.
We will come, definitely. Thank you very much, Stephen.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for watching us, and see you next time.